Okay. Bye-bye. All right, court is calling 2022 CR 42488, State of Texas versus Jose Angel Ruiz. Can I have parties announced for the record for the state?
Ricky Mitchell, Marissa Giovanco, and Ali Jackson.
For the defense?
Teresa Connolly, Lorraine Efron, Your Honor.
And are you Mr. Ruiz?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I've been informed that the jurors are here. Are both parties ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, state, if you'll put your next witness on the stand, please. And did you all talk to the officer? Were y'all able to talk to the pretrial service officer?
No, we didn't call, but we did a partial,
Okay,
the flexible hours.
okay.
Thank you so much, Your Honor.
All right,
Really
you're welcome.
appreciate you.
You're welcome, but make sure you call,
I'm gonna call the lady, her name is Elizabeth or something.
okay, and if you'll talk to the clerks in the back, they will actually scan this to them so they'll have it,
Okay. Thank you
because
so much.
they probably already sent something, but it
Oh, I'm
comes to
sure
me.
they did. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi, good morning, how you doing? All right, it's good seeing you. Well, I should not say that way, but you know, we always talk to each other. Seems like we have some sort of London weather happening.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The courtroom's all chilly.
Okay, do not mention that it's cold in this courtroom. If you don't know how long it took us to
Get it
get,
like this.
yes. Usually it's super hot, 90 degrees.
That's the same thing as our office.
Oh,
I
yeah.
like Josh.
When people come here and they complain about the cold, you know what Deputy Laura tells them? You're a guest, so you can't complain. All right, we're ready.
All right, for the jury.
All right, everyone, please be seated. State, call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls.
All right, if you could raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear and affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, you can lower your hand. Make sure you keep your voice up so that members of the jury and the court reporter can hear. And if you'll state your name for the record.
Sorry. Dr. Kimberly Molina, Molina.
State,
Dr. Molina, Howard.
yes?
Excuse me, Your Honor, this is the witness for the 705 hearing. We need to have a further presence of the jury.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Thank you. Remember my previous instructions, all right? And state,
Oh,
do you have her CV?
Okay, sure.
Oh, somewhere.
All right, if you have her CV, if you can email it to the defense.
What?
Her CV, do you all need her
Right
CV?
here?
Yes.
All right, everyone.
Well, I
please
don't have,
be seated.
do you have Teresa's email? Or do you have a hard copy of it?
I'm searching our system. I know.
Do you want a copy of her CV? Yeah, you
Yes, I
better.
will.
Nice.
Sure. All right, so, Ms. Mitchell, if maybe one of your co-counsels can look for her CV, and then if you can question Dr. Molina about her credentials, and then defense, you'll have an opportunity to question her as well.
Dr. Molina, Where did you receive yours?
I attended and graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with a degree in mathematics. I then attended and graduated from the University of Texas Health Science Center Medical School here in San Antonio. I completed my residency training, my internship at the University of Arkansas in Fort Smith, Arkansas, then returned to San Antonio to complete my training in anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology.
And how are you presently employed?
I am the Chief Medical Examiner of the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office
How long have you been the chief medical?
since 2020.
And before that, where were you employed?
I was the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner at the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office. Before that, I was a Deputy Medical Examiner, and before that, I was the Assistant Medical Examiner. So I've been with the office over 20 years.
And when, you stated where you went to school, can you, how many years you got each different certifications, if you remember?
I graduated from college in 1994. I graduated from medical school in 1998. I received my board certification in anatomic and clinical pathology in 2004. My board certification in forensic pathology in 2005. I started with the office in 2003. I became Deputy Chief Medical Examiner in 2007, and then Chief Medical Examiner in 2020.
And to be a deputy medical examiner, for instance, what are besides the degrees, you mentioned a residency, what other requirements are there to get that kind of certification?
To be a deputy medical examiner in our office, you have to complete your residency training and minimum of anatomic pathology and a fellowship, which is training after residency in forensic pathology.
And since being with the office, have you trained other people?
Yes.
In what capacity?
So I was the program director, which is the director of our fellowship program for a number of years, as well as being on staff. We train all of the fellows who come through our office. We also train medical students and residents who come through our office.
And over the years, can you approximate how many autopsies?
When I first started with the office, I believe there were 4 medical examiners, and we performed approximately 2,000 death investigations a year. Now we have 7 current medical examiners. We perform approximately 3,500 to 4,000 death investigations per year. We divide that up equally across the board. So if you do your math and divide out, that's how many examinations I perform.
And other than performing, how many have you been?
Again, you would add a fellow in that math, and then I would perform my share of those. Again, all of the duties are equally distributed.
And when, in your current role, when a deputy medical examiner performs an autopsy, and on the report, you see your signature attached, what does that signify?
So in our office, every autopsy that's performed is reviewed and co-signed by the chief medical examiner, signifying that the findings and conclusions are appropriate for that case.
And before you sign off saying that the findings and conclusions are appropriate, do you review the case?
It depends on the case, but at a minimum, I review the findings and conclusion.
What about in the case of Mercedes?
In this particular case, I reviewed the entire case. Yes,
I'm sorry, what was that response?
I reviewed the entire case.
All right.
Can you
Um,
move closer to the microphone, doctor?
are you ready to pass the witness? All right,
Thank you.
defense?
You didn't do the autopsy there, did you, doctor?
No,
I'm sorry, my name is Ruiz. Sorry, doctor. You didn't do the autopsy.
Correct.
Did you review the body?
I saw the body in the morgue, yes.
Did you review the body?
I don't know the extent of the question. I didn't perform the examination, but I saw the body in the morgue, yes.
In what sense did you see the body? Did you get involved? Did you just see it passing by on a table? What was the context of that?
Dr. Keenan called me down to see the body while he was performing the examination, and I reviewed the body during the examination.
How long were you there?
I don't recall.
Did you see the body while it was being opened and parts of it were being displayed, or did you just look at the body and saw it next on the table? To what extent did you actually see the body?
Your Honor, I'm gonna check. This is outside the scope of the 705.
I'll allow it. If you can answer the question.
I believe that I saw the body before the examination began, before the body was open, and then I was called down again and saw the body when the body was open, to look at some of the findings that were present.
What findings did you observe?
Specifically, I recall I was asked to look at the injuries on the feet.
And just the feet?
On the feet. I said that's what I recall.
And Your Honor, again, I object to this is outside the scope.
Right. That question is outside the scope of the 705 hearing. Ask your next question, counsel.
What was your underlying scientific theory of what you saw? What was the basis of it?
At the time,
Yes,
I don't know. I had an underlying scientific theory. At the time that we perform an examination, we keep an open mind. We look at all of the facts in front of us. And at the time of the exam, that's only one piece of the information we need.
you only looked at the feet of Mercedes.
No, I said I recalled being called for that reason. However, you asked when I was in the morgue, looking at the body. And again, that is part of what I recall. However, she was open at the time. I don't recall what else I saw.
Some of the questions that are involved in this kind of a hearing are the underlying. We have your qualifications, but the validity of the underlying scientific theory used by the expert. You don't have a theory, is that correct?
You asked what theory I had at the time that I was in the morgue. At the
Right.
time we're in the morgue, we're still examining. Our theories don't come into play until we have all pieces of the investigation, which includes all facets of the autopsy examination, which includes microscopy, toxicology, all testing that we do. You asked what my theory in the morgue. My theory in the morgue was simply to document injuries. The theories again come into play when we have all information available to us, which is sometime after the morgue.
Thank you. So you actually didn't develop a theory until after everything was completed.
Your Honor, objection again, outside the scope.
That's going to be overruled.
Again, we take all of the pieces, all of the information that we have, and at that point, we come up with our conclusions. So again, we have to take all of this information. And it's not necessarily in the morgue.
What was the total amount of information that you used to make recommendations?
So in this particular case, it would have been the autopsy results, the results of the toxicology and chemical testing, the results of microscopy, the results of the radiology.
And I'm sorry,
The final-
just 1 second. For the court reporter, microscopy, could you spell that, please?
Microscopy. MICROSCOPY.
Thank you. All right, defense, you can continue.
You prepared a separate report in context with conversation with, Mr. Attorney Mitchell, Mr. Attorney Giovanni, the chief examiner, Dr. Drawborn, DA victim advocate Marina Winter, and DA intern Tony Rojas. Is that when you actually presented your theory?
Your Honor,
That'll be overruled. You can answer.
I did not prepare a report in this case.
You didn't.
No.
In the report prepared by your office through Dr. Kane, he said he used police reports and medical records, past medical records. Did you review those as well?
I apologize, I did not hear the question.
In Dr. Kanan's final report, he said that it was all compiled with the contribution of police reports, medical reports from the past of the victim, Dr. Zamora Campos reports. Did you look at those as well?
So that information is outlined in our investigative report, which I did review our investigative report. But I did not recall reviewing the police report and the records other than reviewing our investigative report.
Your investigative reports included medical reports of the pediatrician, Dr. Zamora Campos, and the police reports were also indicated in the report as part of the compilation. Did you review those?
So I don't recall reviewing the police reports or the medical reports myself, other than the summaries that exist in our investigative report.
Did you bring records today, pursuant to your Lucas Peckham, that we prepared? I know you're the state's witness right now, but we prepared a Lucas Peckham. Did you bring those records?
Your Honor, objection, the Dukas Sacrum was months ago. She had an assistant bring the records.
All right, that objection, it's outside the scope. Unless you tie that into this hearing, that's outside the scope. So if you want to tie those records to this hearing and you're able to do that, then the court will hear your question. Ask your next question.
Did you review the records that were part of the Dukas Peckham at any time prior to you coming here?
The Dukas Tecum, as I understand it, was a request for any and all of our records as part of our file. I reviewed our entire file. I have our entire file with me today. So yes, I have reviewed the entire file with this case.
Okay. And in that, does it include the reports of Dr. Zamora Campos, the pediatrician?
No,
It doesn't.
no,
Were you aware that the child, in viewing this record, were you aware that the child? Okay, thanks, Tom. Were you aware that the child had asthma?
yes.
And how did that figure into your medical report?
It did not. We ruled out asthma as the cause of death.
Dr. Kanan said in your.
Object to outside the scope, Your Honor, and hearsay.
All right. With regards, just one second, with regards to hearsay, that will be overruled. With regards to outside the scope of this hearing, that will be sustained.
Isn't it true that in your report, you said asthma couldn't be excluded and asphyxia, well, excuse me, asphyxia couldn't be excluded? Is that
Objection
correct?
outside the scope, Your Honor.
All right, that will be overruled.
The report says couldn't exclude it. So I'm asking.
And Your Honor, I would.
Just one moment.
I object.
All right, off the record. Could everyone please review the purpose of a 705 hearing and what should be asked in a 705 hearing? If y'all need 5 minutes to do that, you can do that. But we're only here for her expertise, whether or not she had the underlying data and whether or not she was able to come to whatever conclusion she can come to based upon the underlying data. We're just here to see if her expertise and the underlying data is present for the conclusions. We're not here for this to be I don't want to say dry run, but for this to be a full open cross-examination. So if everyone could please focus on this hearing and what the 705 hearing is about, that would be appreciated.
Sir, Your
You're
Honor, if I
back.
may, the underlying data is what I.
Ask the question, counsel. Just ask your question, please.
Underlying data from your report, from the medical examiner's report, included medical records from the pediatrician based on your report and police reports. That was your underlying data for this that you referred to. And
Objection, that's a misstatement, and again, I think this is.
Overruled. Here's the thing, people. Just ask your questions and the court will make a ruling. So ask your next question.
your underlying data pursuant to this hearing included, based on records, the reports of the pediatrician. Is that correct?
In a case such as this, underlying data would include past medical history, which is part of our investigative report, which I did review.
Yes. But you say it excluded asphyxiation.
What excluded asphyxiation?
The report.
The report, if you're referring to the findings, includes a statement about asphyxiation, correct, having nothing to do with asthma or any underlying medical illnesses.
Thank you. Yes, witness.
All right. Do you have any objections to this witness defense?
Only until it said that she didn't perform the autopsy.
All
She
right,
only
that-
looked at the body and only examined the feet. So it's a matter of what she's able to testify to that she saw.
all right. That,
She's limited to her feet.
all right. That objection, that will be overruled. You can object at the point in time that's appropriate if you believe there's something that she did not see or she did not view.
She testified that she only saw the feet.
My understanding of her testimony is there was more than just her seeing the feet. Is that correct, doctor?
Correct.
All right, let's bring the jurors in. State, after this witness, is this your last witness?
This is our last witness,
All
right?
So defense, this is going to be their last witness. After this witness testifies, I'll give you all a break to make sure if you have witnesses you want to bring, you'll be able to do that.
And just so the court's aware, we do have, they wanted us to recall CPS investigator Dame, and he is here.
All right. So I'll give you all a short break and then we'll proceed with your case if there are witnesses you wish to call. My mom said it was thunderstorming. But she's like, it was great for her grass and her plants. So I'm like, yay. Just a moment. And everyone, please remember my previous instructions about no outbursts or anything of that nature. All right, we can bring you.
All right, for the jury.
All right, everyone, please be seated. You're still under oath. And if you could state your name again, just for the record,
Dr. Kimberly Molina.
state.
Good morning, Dr. Molina. How are you presently employed?
I am the Chief Medical Examiner at the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office.
And as the chief medical examiner, how many other deputy medical examiners do you supervise?
We are currently an office of 7, so I currently have 6 medical examiners who report to me, including a deputy chief. Although we are bringing in 2 more physicians, so we actually have an office of 9. We just currently have 2 vacancies.
In your capacity as the chief medical examiner, did you have an opportunity to review the autopsy of a child named Mercedes Losoya?
Yes,
Can you explain to the jury what the significance of manner of death versus cause of death?
so manner of death is an epidemiologic term used on a death certificate to describe the circumstances of how a death came about. By law, it's limited to 5 choices: natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined.
Now, Mercedes Losoya, can you describe the injuries that were present on her?
So the office performed an autopsy on Mercedes Losoya. Autopsies being medical examinations performed by physicians looking for injuries, signs of natural disease, to determine a cause of death or the reason someone passed. In the case of Mercedes Losoya, at the time of the autopsy, numerous injuries were identified upon the body, including contusions, which are bruises, abrasions, which are scratches, and a laceration, which is a skin tear. Specifically, the laceration was on the back of the head. The contusions and abrasions were scattered over the entirety of the body, most averaging around the size of an inch, but ranging up to about 4 inches.
And how old was Mercedes Losoya when she was found?
5 years old.
And counsel, you need to keep your voice up.
Oh, okay, sorry. She was 5 years old. And when you say she had injuries all over her body, from her feet to her head, am I understanding that correct?
Correct.
Now, when you have a 5-year-old child, how do injuries like that affect a 5-year-old child as opposed to a large adult? If you understand the question, I'm not sure.
So, as I understand the question to me, having multiple bruises or abrasions, so bruises and scratches on the body affecting a child versus an adult, in both situations, these are usually considered painful injuries. So you may have some limitations of movement or activity, depending on where the injury is, the type of injury, and the severity of the injury.
Now, if someone, say an adult male, were to punch, let's say, the arm of an adult 5'10", normal sized arm, and leave a bruise the size of their fist, and also have a 5-year-old child of Mercedes' height and weight, with her size arms, also hit with the same force and with the same size fist and leave a same size bruise. Does the surface area account for how much it would impact an adult with that injury versus a child? Yeah, trying to-
So the surface area can play a role. Again, what we're looking at is, let's say 4 inches, right? 4 inches on an adult's arm may be just a portion of the arm, whereas 4 inches on a child's arm may be, say, half of the arm. So again, that would potentially affect the use of that arm, or what could potentially be injured, just given it's a larger area percentage-wise on a child than on an adult.
Now, other than bruises and contusions and abrasions and lacerations, did you notice anything in reviewing her case regarding her mouth?
She had a healing injury on the inside of the lower lip and some absent teeth corresponding to that injury. So the front teeth of the lower gum line were what we call traumatically absent, meaning there were holes for teeth, but no teeth.
What about her hair? Did you notice anything about her hair when she was first brought in?
Her hair was sparse and thinning in location. So kind of areas of thinning versus areas of more, what we'll say, normal growth.
Now, okay. Now, you mentioned there was a laceration to the back of the head. Was, as part of the autopsy, do they actually, Dr. Cannon in this case perform the autopsy, correct?
Correct. This autopsy was performed by Dr. Cannon, one of the deputy medical examiners in the office.
And what is the standard practice after a review of the external body? What is standard practice in an autopsy?
So in an autopsy, well, the autopsy after the external would be the internal, would be opening the body cavities and looking inside the body.
You mentioned a laceration to the head. Was there any internal injury in the head?
There was some bruising of the scalp. So underneath that laceration, there's some bruising of the scalp, but inside the head itself, so inside the skull, there were no significant brain injuries identified.
What about along her spine? Were there any injuries identified there?
So on the back of the spine, at about the level of the kind of fourth thoracic. So easiest way to do this is if you kind of feel the bony points on the back of your spine. If you feel the first one and you go down about 4, that bony point on the back of the vertebral body, there was a little fracture of that bony point.
And what is significant about that particular part of the spine that there's a fracture?
So that is called the spinous process. And that is where some of the ligaments that hold our back together insert. And so fractures such as this can certainly occur with blunt force injuries, like bruises and abrasions, meaning, with a force to that area. But it can also occur with sudden or kind of over what we call extension of the back, because those ligaments that are anchored on that bone can get pulled with such force that it breaks a little bit of the bone off.
And what typically causes that kind of injury?
That type of injury is most typically, it's not a common injury, but it's most typically seen with that kind of ligament pull. So when we have kind of over flexion, over extension of the back.
Okay, and can you demonstrate with your arm what an overextension would be?
So it would be kind of leaning, like if you were suddenly to flex is to bend, to kind of flex down, right? That could potentially not just in doing this, but it would have to be a vigorous event.
Your Honor, may I touch the witness?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna show you, what's been admitted as exhibit 107. It has been identified as a photo of Mercedes LaSoya. And it has been identified that this is conduct where her arms had been bound up, and she is on the ground. Would a position like this be consistent with potentially causing that injury?
So I'm sorry, just to clarify, her arms are held in this position,
Her arms are held and
and is there a weight, or they're just held
they're
by
just held
something.
and it
above the ground?
above the ground.
It's possible, yes.
Okay, were there any other injuries that could be seen internally?
Just from the internal examination, nothing that we haven't described, meaning those same bruises that we discussed that we saw externally. When we look inside, we can see those as well, because they go into the tissues beneath the skin. But there were no additional injuries other than those that we've discussed.
Now, after the physical examination of the body, are there samples that are inspected from, or were there samples inspected from Mercedes?
Samples are taken at the time of autopsy for additional testing. We take blood, we take vitreous, which is the fluid behind the eye, and we can perform additional testing on that, like chemical testing, toxicology testing. Samples were also taken from the organs at the time of the autopsy to look at under the microscope so that we could see if there was any disease or trauma under the microscope.
And which organs were examined under the microscope?
We examined what we consider kind of the major organs, so heart, lungs, liver, spleen, thymus, adrenal glands, kidneys, also sections from the skin where the bruises and abrasions were.
And excuse me, could you spell thymus, please?
THYMUS.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, well, you said the lungs. Was there anything remarkable about the lungs as a
The lung showed some kind of scattered small areas of foreign material, consistent with what we call aspiration, without a lot of response. There's some early response to this. What that means is that easiest way to describe it, we've probably all done it, is you go to drink your coffee in the morning and it goes down the wrong pipe, right? So it goes in your airway instead of in your esophagus. You cough, you get that out, but some of it goes down into your lungs. If you were to die shortly thereafter, and we looked at lungs under the microscope, we might see that there was some material in the lungs that didn't belong there. Didn't cause the death, but we can still see that it's there, and we can see the body reacting to the fact that it's there. And we saw that in the lungs in this case.
Now, in Mercedes' case, you did review her medical history as part of this review. Is that correct?
Correct.
And in Mercedes' case, there were a lot of reports of vomiting. Is vomiting, would that be consistent with possibly aspiration at the time of vomiting?
Yes, I mean, that's a concern with vomiting, right? Is that as you vomit, you could potentially kind of inhale some of that into the lungs. It's certainly possible.
Now, as the body is dying, does that affect the ability for something to enter the lungs?
So yes, we tend to call this terminal aspiration, meaning in the dying process, we no longer have that protective mechanism that keeps our body from, say, swallowing food into the esophagus instead of into the lungs. So it's not uncommon for us to see, again, this aspiration, this foreign material kind of scattered in the lungs. Again, it's not something significant. It's something that we see, and it's not uncommon that we see it occurring right around the time as people are dying terminal.
And based on what was seen, was the level of aspiration anything that would have contributed to the death?
No.
Okay, so once the samples, fluid samples and everything you mentioned were sent for testing, was there a review of for, I guess, for vitamins and all of the type of, when we go to the doctor, when we get when they take blood and they measure our glucose and all that kind of stuff, were those kind of tests done?
So we performed a toxicology test, which is looking for any sorts of drugs or medications that are in the body at the time of death. And we look for everything from drinking alcohol to aspirin to prescription medications to illicit drugs. Additionally, we perform chemical testing, looking at the electrolytes. So specifically like sodium, potassium, glucose. We do not necessarily look for things like vitamin levels or anemia, as they don't necessarily have a role to play in this death. And some tests simply cannot be done post-mortem. But we do the tests that we're able to do that are applicable to each particular case. So in this particular case, we did the toxicology testing as well as that electrolyte testing we just discussed, which looks at electrolytes, glucose, and kidney markers.
And what did that tell you and Dr. Cannon at the time?
Well, all of our toxicology screening was negative. So we didn't find any sort of drugs or medications present. The electrolyte screening was within normal limits for post-mortem, meaning after death. Although the kidney function was one of our markers for kidney function, urea nitrogen, was elevated, telling us that there was an element of kidney failure at the time of death.
Now, were there any further tests done of the kidneys?
So as mentioned before, we did do microscopy, which is looking at the tissues under the microscope. So we looked at the kidneys as well as the other tissues under the microscope and did some additional, there was a finding found in those slides. And so we did an additional test where we stained the kidneys with it's called an immunoglobulin. It's a test to see if we can identify exactly what the substance is that was in the kidney. We were able to do that, and we found myoglobin in the kidneys.
And what is significant about finding myoglobin in the kidneys?
Myoglobin is a muscle protein that needs to stay in muscle. It's very toxic if released into the bloodstream, specifically toxic to the kidneys, where it can accumulate, meaning it sits in our kidneys and causes renal failure. So the finding of myoglobin in the kidneys, in these what we call casts in the kidneys, is one, it tells us that there's renal failure, which is consistent with the test we did to show there was renal failure. And two, it shows us that there was significant muscle damage, that this myoglobin was released and then accumulated in the kidneys.
And how is there a word for that when you find myoglobin that has been released in the body? Is that a diagnosis associated with that?
The term we use is rhabdomyolysis. This
Okay.
basically means that the muscles are breaking down, releasing the myoglobin.
All right, and could you spell that last word?
Rhabdomyolysis.
All right, Diana, you spelled that correctly. All right, you can ask your next question.
And we refer to that as rhabdo for short.
Physicians usually call it rhabdo, yes.
And is rhabdo something that can happen to anyone?
Yes, it's been shown to occur with trauma being the main cause, but also with exertion. Military recruits the military is well aware of this because it can happen with muscular exertion, as well as with certain drug toxicities and other causes.
And you mentioned trauma. Is it your opinion that the bruising and injuries that Mercedes Lozoya sustained could have contributed to the trauma to the muscles, which contributed to the myoglobin in the kidney, otherwise rhabdo?
Yes, it is possible that the rhabdo resulted from the trauma that was present, yes.
Now, you also mentioned exertion of the muscles. There has been testimony that, and video evidence actually, that Mercedes would be forced to hold heavy objects for hours at a time. Would that kind of muscle exertion damage the muscles and lead to rhabdo?
Yes,
So could they independently cause rhabdo? The trauma, could that in and of itself lead to rhabdo?
yes,
Could the muscle exertion in and of itself also lead to rhabdo?
yes,
And having them together, does that increase the likelihood of rhabdo?
that's possible, yes.
Now, other than the rhabdo, what else could lead to kidney damage that might be due to the injuries that Mercedes sustained?
So additionally, we have a significant amount of bruises or injuries to the body. And each of those bruises, right, would result in what we call cellular injury. And when our cells are injured, they tend to swell. The way I describe this is think about spraining your ankle. You go out, you sprain your ankle, and your ankle swells, right? When you have that isolated swelling, that fluid has to come from somewhere. And usually that comes from our bloodstream. And it's not a big deal, right? But imagine if you had multiple injuries all over your body. So you had lots of areas of swelling. This could potentially deplete some of the fluid that's in our bloodstream, meaning making it less. We call that hypovolemia. And that can also lead to kidney damage. It's like being dehydrated when you're not dehydrated, right? You're just pulling the fluids out into your tissues instead of having them in your bloodstream.
Can you explain to the jury what hyperkalemia is and if that was something that was possible?
Hyperkalemia is when you have too much potassium in your blood. This can result from tissue injuries. Potassium is essential for us to have to survive, but it lives inside the cells. So when cells get injured and they release their contents into the bloodstream, they're releasing potassium into the bloodstream. And potassium is a very toxic electrolyte, must be kept in a very specific amount of range in our body. If we get too much, it leads to what we call cardiac arrhythmias, abnormal heartbeats, can lead to cardiac arrest. So too high can be lethal. So when we have a great deal of trauma, our potassium can get high as those cells die and release the potassium. So that could be from all of the different injuries that were present, but also in rhabdomyolysis. Remember, that is where the muscle cells are dying and are releasing their contents into the bloodstream. So along with that myoglobin we discussed, potassium is also released. So hyperkalemia, high potassium, is also associated with rhabdomyolysis.
Now, is rhabdomyolysis something that if it were treated promptly could be recovered from?
Yes,
If it is left untreated, does it pose a substantial risk?
yes,
In the days leading up to Mercedes' death, there was testimony and evidence that she was fatigued, that she didn't want to eat, that she was vomiting. Are those symptoms of kidney or renal failure?
yes.
I'll pass the witness room.
Defense? Defense, your witness? Your witness, she's passed the witness.
Your Honor, could we have a little break right now?
For what purpose?
I'm sorry?
What purpose?
Uh, just a break. My blood sugars are pretty low right now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you all a 10-minute break. Remember my previous instructions.
All right, the jury. Give me something to eat.
I'm completely blind. I'm sorry, I'm just absolutely. I never just saw autopsy. I'm listening to this jazz, but I need some.
Sugar, I have Coke, I have
Not, I'm not cooking. I need some protein right now.
protein.
Protein
upstairs. I have some cashews. You want those?
No,
I'll go downstairs and get
I had a blood sugar.
Okay, I'll bring you some
I
purple.
have a protein shake.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to.
That's what I need.
You need a protein shake? Do you have one in your office?
I think so.
If not, I've got some upstairs.
I'll text you.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Molina, I know you've testified before. Ruiz been invoked. All right, you can remain
I'll be
seated there if you want to walk around.
Sorry.
Teresa, there's food in the back if you would like something.
It's not food, Your Honor. I need a